All right, World Building 101. My name is Becca Justiniano. I am an author, in-home tutor, and a bunch of other things. I also run programming. And I will be the moderator for today. Starting on that end, let's introduce ourselves.
I'm Kenneth Justiniano. I am a web developer, designer, graphic artist, and game developer.
My name is Maurice Broaddus. I'm a science fiction and fantasy author. I am a middle school librarian, the resident Afrofuturist at the Kepler Institute, and also an editor over at Apex Magazine.
I'm Walt. I'm an editor with Novus Mundi Books. Previously, I was the editor-in-chief of Ring of Fire Press and the Grandfield Gazette prior to Eric Flint's demise. And I write fiction, I write nonfiction, and I'm a member of the Association of Professional Futurists.
Okay, we've got a wonderful panel with lots of credentials and all sorts of interesting and diverse experience. So, let's start with an easy question. When you are building a world, where do you start?
What you mean?
Somebody speak. I'll speak.
Why not? I can't tell though whether the pool is 12 feet deep or 2 feet deep, but I'll dive in. If you're world building, just for the sake of world building, you can start pretty much anywhere you want, but if you're world building for the purposes of creating a story or stories, you have to start with the story. Your world has to support where you want to go with the story.
Okay. Any response?
Yeah, for me, it's situational. Because we start with a blank page. And with a blank page, you can do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And anything can be intimidating for a lot of people. And so frankly, I'm terrified of a blank page. And so I typically don't come to the blank page unarmed. And so arming for me looks like a lot of brainstorming notes, and that can take a variety of different forms. So I'll give 2 different examples. So with my novel, Pimp My Airship, that started with an idea. And the idea was America lost the Revolutionary War, now what? Right? So I get to build from that starting point. You know, what are the consequences of that 200 years later? What could society look like 200 years later? And I start building on that idea from that pivot point. Start building that out. With my current trilogy, which is a Sweep of Stars, I spent 1.5 years just dreaming alongside my neighbors. It's like, what is the world that we are trying to create? If we were to win, what would that look like? What would the politics of that world look like? What would the economic system of that world look like? How would schools work? How would we prioritize art and science, or what would that look like in this world? So I spent basically 1.5 years just dreaming alongside the neighbors in my community, because I was just like, what does it look like to dream collectively? And I can take all of that back to that blank page, and then like, okay, I can get started.
For me, when I'm world building, I'm normally world building for some type of campaign that I'm building. And I take it from, I build the planet first. And that process normally takes me into going and drawing up sketches, actually, making paintings, and actually getting a visual representation. And understanding how the dynamics of the world work. I want to know what the sky looks like. I want to know how the interactions between the environment is going to affect the land masses, is going to affect what grows, what it's going to affect how these people, view the world that they live in. And to me, that process starts first by getting a visual representation. I'm a very visual person, I'm an artist. So, yeah, that's my process.
Long, long ago, back before I became a sign language interpreter and all that fun stuff, I was a geology major. My particular focus was on plate tectonics, and I still start there. Yeah, I need to know what the story's going to be, but I need to know what the whole world looks like first. And that means I need to know where are the rocks, where are the mountains, where are the rivers, where's all of this stuff. And then I look at the story and go, okay, where on this world does that fit? And once you know where the rocks are, where the water is, what grows, what's the weather like, then you can figure out wonderful fun things like, what's the mythology? Who are the gods to the people that you're writing about? And yeah, you've got a nice little story, but the details, even if they never make it to print, are important. And so yeah, there's an awful lot of work that goes into my books that never makes it onto the page. And a lot of that is, doing the plate tectonics of alien worlds.
I think you're right. And then again, I disagree with you. I think it all makes it onto the page. It may not be in dialogue, it may not be in description, but all that work does make it onto the page.
Okay, I'll take that. I'll take that because yeah, the page looks very different if I don't do the work.
How many of you are writers?
Can you hold up papers so that I can see?
Yeah, that would be great.
I have.
Okay, there's a bunch of you.
There's a bunch of you. Okay.
Good. Because my advice is mostly going to be for writers. Because I'm an editor and that's what I do.
Yeah. What is the most important aspect of world building?
What do you mean?
What is the one piece that should never, ever, ever be left out?
Intent. I mean, there has to be a purpose to the world. If there, I have been in games, I have worked with people that are like, oh, okay, it's a blue marble. Why is the blue marble there? That's my first question always. What is it? Why are your people there? What are they doing? I mean, even on Dune, you've got this really harsh, barren world, what looks to be a barren world. But that's the planet that all the drugs are being made on. So there is a purpose. So what is the purpose of your creation?
I'm going to go with consistency. So, all right, so you have a blank page. So you can make up anything you want. Any magic system you want, any level of technology. You can make up anything you want. But even then, once you've done that, you have to also build in your own rule system on how all of that stuff works. And then once you have that rule system in place, you can't violate those rules. I think consistency is one of the biggest things about worlds to keep in mind that, and kind of bouncing off your idea of intent, is that your world actually should also, I think my world's acting as another character in the story, right? Mm-hmm. So that world has a background, it has a history, and frankly, that world also exists as an obstacle course for my protagonists. There is a forge to challenge them to sometimes get in the way of my own plot. But the world does exist on its own. So consistency and, I don't have to summarize another point, forge. It's consistency and forging for the world.
Yeah, I love your point about you can have any magic system you want, but it has to be a system. And yeah, there's nothing more annoying in reading than thinking that you know how the fireballs work, and then somebody does it different, without any sort of explanation. And I have actually written several stories where there are multiple magic systems, and the people who use them argue about how can you do it that way? It's like, well, I'm using this source of power. Oh. And yeah, it's like you can have multiple things, but the thing of it is like, you don't have to have the physics that we live in right now, but you have to have physics. Mm-hmm. And you have to know what that means. I mean, seriously, if gravity didn't always work, what the heck would that look like? sometimes there's gravity, sometimes there's not. You know, you do realize that the Earth is held together by gravity?
Well, inconsistency is going to be the first thing to pull a reader out of their story.
Yep.
But then along your lines of the physics of something, I keep thinking about the Star Trek reboot, right? And every time I watch it, I'm like, what does red matter actually do? And it seems to do whatever the writer needs it to do in that moment.
Writes the plot.
For all you
Right,
writers,
exactly.
for all you writers, that's a bad choice.
It's a bad choice.
The one thing that I would say, and this goes again to intent, if you're going to have that trick pony, you're going to have at some point in your story, you need to explain it. This is happening, but it's happening because. And that again goes back to my comment about having intent. Having a reason behind why things break, why there's, okay, here's the set of rules, but this can happen because. And the thing is, the funnest thing is not telling. You know, have the individuals that are either reading your story or partaking in your game try to figure it out on their own. And then, you know, that leads to more interactions in the world.
Yeah, I had it was an unpublished novel, but I started the world building with, all right, the sky has to be orange. And my reason why was, that would be cool. Right? But then I can't just leave it as, that would be cool, because there's going to be at some point, there's got to be a reason for that, which means I call up my geologist friends and then say, hey, what would the planet have to look like for me to produce orange skies? Right? And so I have that in one thing, but again, we're talking about a blank page, right? And so in my current novel, all the starships are powered by jazz music. This is a blank page. We can literally do whatever we want. Now, at some point, I have to do some sort of hand-waving explanation of how that works, but it's just enough to hang the story on to get the reader to go, okay, I can buy that, I guess, and then keep it moving.
Yeah, I had a story where starship navigation was done by tarot card. Well, I mean, they were slipping outside the regular universe, so they had to have some other, basic math wasn't going to work because they weren't going to be in a universe where the part of the universe where math worked. Yeah. So they had some outside. So tarot cards. So the navigators were a special class of people who had the ability to actually understand the cards, and not just like I memorized the meaning. No, to understand what the cards were saying. And then they had a young, new navigator, and told us, like, take us someplace new. And so the cards navigated them to the start of a new universe. Oops.
Yeah, well, Maurice is right. The principal rule is consistency. You can do anything you want in world building as long as you are consistent from first principles. Starting with geology is very good as a way to give yourself some ground, pun intended. And there are other ways to come at it as well. One of the things that new writers often do is they don't think about consistency with language, with linguistics, and there's nothing that drops somebody out of the reader's trance when they are writing Gakar across a desert waste, and somebody says, "Hey, Bob." So even your names have to be consistent with the culture that you're designing.
Oh yes, naming conventions are very important.
You can name somebody anything you want, as long as it's consistent with the way you name everybody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things that I studied when I was getting my linguistics stuff were the naming conventions and how they relate to culture. And if you actually look up the meanings of a lot of our modern English names, you find that way, way, way back when, they were things like flower, beautiful, princess, warrior. These were the words that were, it's like, and so now you think, like, we think a lot about, native cultures and their funny naming of people of like red bear. Like, well, yeah, but that's what your name means too. You just forgot it. But yeah, it's like naming conventions are a very, very deep part of culture. And culture is extremely important as part of world building. It's like, yeah, the rocks are there, but the rocks don't have culture, and the rocks don't tell you what your characters want. Do we have any questions from the audience?
This isn't good.
Yellow. I see a yellow.
One of the things you guys started off with was how the world building needs to serve the story. One of the things that I noticed is that it's really easy to go down a rabbit hole. Like one of the examples you came up with was plate tectonics, and like you could just end up like spending months designing the geology of a world. How do you balance that, the world building against like not spending so much time on the world building that you end up not even really working on the story?
Okay, to summarize your question, if I understand it correctly, is how do we balance the world building versus actually getting to the story?
Yes.
Okay? An example being how starting at plate tectonics can be a bit of a rabbit hole. Understatement. All right, folks, how do you balance?
All right, so 3 quick examples. The first one isn't even my example. It's just I was on a panel with P. Jelly Clark, and he was talking about, because we're kind of cut from the same cloth, where we love doing the research. Research is what we love doing, and that's part of the fun of world building, right? And so he had a scene in his book, and I take place in the 10th century, and everybody stopped to camp, and then they drank some wine. And so he said he went down a rabbit hole of what kind of wine would be appropriate for this age. And then he started there and then went into brewing methods of the various wines. And then the wines, and how wines represent different levels of culture. So which class of people would be drinking what kind of wine in this sort of situation. He said, I went down that rabbit hole for about 3 hours just so he could write the sentence, they drank wine.
But the thing there is, from the information that you got there, from the information that you get from doing a stint like that, okay, you now have what your master level breweries are. So, it's like you've got what who your vendors should be, who your guilds, wine. We're going to have a whole wine guild. We're going to have, a whole system of casting that needs to happen for the different kinds of wine. And all this stuff, and I bring this up because this is all stuff that's in the back of your head that, okay, you finish writing your chapter here, but you can put in throwaway parts in your story, about how the wine taster, the sommelier, if I'm saying it right, the sommelier, how they have like their own cast and their own level of who is top, and you can have one character that is trying to be that, and he can be just a very minimal character in the background that just pops up every now and then. Oh, he's now a level 1, now he's a level 3, now he's a master and he's working for the court. And it's like, this is the thing that I love about gaming. You will get people at the table that it's like, that just, what happened? And then they will pull you aside. In my instance, they will pull me aside and there'll be like 15 to 20 minutes of just going over that. You know, we have like a side adventure on that.
Well, then my second example is was when I went and started writing the novel, Pimp My Airship. And so I'd already done a ton of world building because I originally wrote short stories. So I knew how, you know, I knew what the world looked like. I knew what the architecture looked like. I knew what the different people groups looked like. You know, all these different aspects of world building I'd already done for the short stories. So I already knew a lot of the stuff going in, right? But in writing the novel, it taught me another thing about world building, which is, because you never have to build out the entire world, right? You have to build out enough to hang your story on. I mean, that's ultimately the balance. But I realized that when I was writing the novel, like halfway through, I came to a stopping point. I was like really stuck. I'm like, I don't even know where to go with this book, and I didn't even understand why I was stuck until I realized I'd never thought through the economic system of the world. And I realized the story was coming to a point where it was going to turn on business dealings. And I had no idea how the economic system worked. And so I had to take some time, build out the economic system, and then like, oh, suddenly the story's flowing again. So you can go down as many rabbit holes as you want, but at some point you have to start writing. And in the writing itself, that will reveal the other elements of world building, you know, that you need to do, and then you'll just come up with other stuff of like, hey, while I'm at it, ooh, I just thought of something else that you can then add in your second draft.
Or give yourself notes that you have to do research on.
That's true. Research is your friend, but Eric Flint told me one time that vague is your best friend. One of the things that it's important to remember is that you are working on an entire world. It's not just English language dominant Middle Ages. There's other cultures, other languages, other societies in your world. They may not have a great deal of impact on the story you want to tell, unless of course they do. You could choose to tell the story with a whole bunch of different ethnic, cultural, religious, social differences in the populations that you're moving around your world. And personally, I think that makes the story more solid. It makes the story more interesting, and it makes what you're writing considerably deeper.
And one of the easiest ways to start a story, to really get a story going, is take a character and move them out of their comfort zone and into someplace new. They have to deal with all of that new. You need to know what all of that new is. As far as going to your point about the plate tectonics, I play with plate tectonics like all the time. And when I have downtime and I am bored, I will start thinking about new ways that plate tectonics can affect a world. So I have all of that just sitting in the back of my head. So when I go to start building a new world for a story, I can pull out one of those and just go. And that's how I keep the balance, is that I've been doing that background stuff just, you know, to put myself to sleep, to avoid boredom, that kind of thing. Never underestimate the ability of your brain to work on stuff when you're not paying attention, and use it. I've often told people, I am always writing. Right now, I'm writing. Characters are standing in the back of my head, talking things through. I'm not paying attention, but they're there nonetheless. Worlds are moving their plate tectonics around. I'm not paying attention, but they're doing it nonetheless. So learn to tap into that, so that when you go to actually sit down and do the writing, the part that people looks like writing to other people, yeah, that's a teeny tiny part of writing, just so you know. Typing is a very, very small part of writing. But you have all of that already in your head. I know it's like a lot of times, like when I get stuck in a story, especially in a particular scene or dialogue in particular, I'll go wash the dishes, do the laundry, that sort of thing. Why? Because then my brain can, work through all of the possibilities until I hit on the one that actually works. And then like, okay, now I'm ready. Boom, 1,000 words later.
That's why my wife loves writer's block.
Something that I was going to suggest, especially for you wanting to know when to stop and when to move forward, do your world building with someone else. People have this mentality that, this all has to be in my head. I have people that I trust that we're always chatting about, world building, character building, game development. And it's one of those situations where having someone else to soundboard, to talk topics about, that will, it will push you to a point where you're like, no, I have to write that down. And it
There's
also,
nothing quite like having a friend ask you a question about your world that you don't know the answer to yet.
yeah.
Well, that actually, the third thing that I'm going to bring up was, I wrote the story called At the Village Vanguard. And that started with me and a buddy. Okay, so it also involved gummy bear vodka, which it's surprisingly good. And we finished this bottle, and then we find ourselves on my floor just looking up at the ceiling and going, and he said, you know what we need to do? What do we need to do? We need to take this neighborhood and put it on the moon. Yeah, we do. Even the Long's Donuts? Yeah, the Long's Donuts got to go too. Yeah, I should build that world. And so the next day, start building this world. And then I actually did, again, going back down to that research rabbit hole, I must have spent probably 2 weeks figuring out the logistics of moving a neighborhood to the moon.
If you did it in 2 weeks, you were wonderful.
Well, I had all the transport worked out. I had how it was gonna be self-powered, how it could be self-sustaining. I had all this stuff worked out. And then when I went to write the story, and I looked at the first draft, I was like, 3,000 words of the 5,000 word story was me letting you know how much research I did. Right?
Your editor would come along and say, why don't you leave that off and start here?
Well, luckily I had an internal editor who said, by the way, you have not left you much room for story. and so then I have to cut out all the stuff that the story doesn't hinge on. Mm-hmm. And then the part that the story did hinge on was basically how's the power supply work for this community. And so everything else, while it informs the writing, it doesn't get on the page, right? But then, so it was a painful cut, but 2,000 of those 3,000 research words has to go. Now, fast forward, I didn't realize that story was going to be the basis of my novel trilogy now, right? But now, all that research has already been done. And I can use those words all over again, right? So, so nothing ever actually gets wasted. So, because it either informs the work or sometimes it'll find its way back onto the page, just not in that particular story.
My writing process used to include writing huge amounts of exposition. And then my first step in editing was to lop off the first third of the story. Like about a third of it was usually about how much I had to just cut off, and that's where the story actually started, and I could move on from there. But I had to write the first third just to make sure I understood everything. I've got orange.
So Becca's question was, how do you balance the research and the story writing? And the answer I got was, why would you want to do that? Is that about how it goes?
Okay, so to recap, so make sure everybody heard. First question was, how do we balance the research and writing? And the answer that second question heard was, why would you want to? And he wants to know if that's a reasonable thing.
I think that there's a point at which it's just like if you're doing a software project, at some point you have to shoot the engineers and take the product to market.
As Elon learned, that's not really what you want to do.
It depends on which engineers you shoot. Seriously though, when you get a feel for it, and it is one of the best things I can say. After you do it a couple of times, you get a feel for when your cake is baked enough that you can start writing. I know that sounds really airy-fairy and all that, but it's not. You know it when it happens.
There's a more practical version of that. Deadlines.
Well, there is that too.
Deadlines are your friend. Deadline tells you, you better get started on the actual writing part right now, because otherwise you're not going to get your story turned in on time.
And before you even start your research, ask yourself the question, what am I researching this for? Once you hit that, stop, write something.
Yeah, and it's very much story dependent, you know, when all said and done. But I also know this is just, again, there's no waste words, at least in the way I operate, because even as I'm continuing to research for my trilogy, I'm like literally editing book 2 as we speak. Any research I continue to do, well, I'm still writing other things. It's just not this project also. So if I could be, you know, if I stumble across some key bit of research as I'm world building, like, wait a second, that would be great for me to write another story set in this universe where the majority of the world building is already done. I'm just focusing on this new thing, this new fun fact I just learned, and I can build a whole story just off of that. So it's about creating the engine, and then the engine just sort of keeps powering everything else.
Well, the other part of that is a lot of what you heard us talking about was what we do on our downtime. You know, oh, I'm working on an actual project right now. What am I doing for this project? Yeah, we're not doing all of that research for that. He's hanging out with a friend drinking gummy bear vodka, and a story happened. That sort of thing happens, and you sort of have to be open to that. I do, like I said, I do play tectonics just for fun. I play with that stuff. I look at how it works. I look at the new research on where the plates are moving here on Earth just to see how things are working. Not because I'm researching a project, but because that is fun for me. I'm weird, I know.
No, what's so very important about that is that's her area of expertise. We all have areas of expertise that we can draw on for our world building. I mean, I think of J.R.R. Tolkien. He was a linguist and he was a cartographer. Shockingly, that sort of stuff popped up in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Now, granted, I hate elf songs, and that caused me to not read the book for the longest time, because I get to a patch and I'm like, oh, elves are singing, I'm out. And then someone told me, by the way, you do know you can just skip that, right? And I was like,
Or you can turn it into something that you can actually understand in your own mind.
right. Well, and
Which is what I used to do.
not only did I skip the elf songs, then I decided, you know what would be great in my current novel? Hip-hop lyrics. I had to learn elf songs. Someone was learning some tunes right now.
Yeah.
Klingon hip-hop.
Sweetie, there's going to be issues. I am going to be singing Klingon hip-hop in my head for weeks, and you're going to get to live with it.
Just nobody tell Lawrence Schoen. Please. He's got enough to worry about with a Klingon hip-hop lyrics.
Okay, we had blue over here.
Yeah, I'm shocked that there, I mean, first to comment on the last exchange, I'm shocked that there isn't already a Klingon hip-hop group.
I'm pretty sure they're out there somewhere.
And also, when you are running into something in your research where you realize that this is completely outside of the universe of your knowledge, like, say, astrophysics, how do you start?
Go find experts.
Wikipedia is your friend.
Wikipedia
no,
has
seriously.
citations at the bottom.
Tells you where to go do your research.
Click on the link, follow the link to the person who wrote it, send them an email.
That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to fake it till you make it. For example, the creation of the Ansible. Everybody knows what an Ansible is now. It's a means of talking faster than light. But Ursula Le Guin had to invent it. And she needed a method of talking faster than light. So she came up with a thing and she named it the Ansible. You can do that too. There's nothing that is going to keep you from doing that.
I would like to point out that there's the Heisenberg compensators. That was the whole, well, we know that there's uncertainty in the location of microscopic particles, so how does the transporter actually work? We have compensators for that.
Yeah, and then they followed it up with, it works very well, actually.
These are not the physics you're looking for.
I'll say this, because like I said, I'm editing I've done the first draft of this novel, and I've just literally, just a couple pages ago, I ran across this paragraph, and I'm just like, I don't understand a word in this paragraph. It was very sciencey. And so I knew at some point I had done some research, and I'd asked somebody a question and created this paragraph out of their answer. I'm just now looking at it going, yeah, I have no idea. Sounds good at this point, because I knew I'd done the research, I knew I'd gone to an expert, and had a fact check, so I'm just like, yeah, I have no idea what this means, but hopefully this will cover a multitude of sins to the reader. But then the other example, so my first novel trilogy was called Knights of Breeden Court. And I pitched it as The Wire meets Excalibur, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of gang activity and a lot of open air drug dealings that go on. And so because I'm a thorough researcher, I end up on street corners watching the drug dealers do their business as I have my notepad. Carry on.
I truly appreciate that.
But at the time, I was doing a lot of, I was a volunteer at a ministry, and we were doing a lot of, I was working a lot with homeless teenagers, and so I was used to just running around on the streets, and so hanging out with drug dealers, I was just like, oh yeah, sure. And I have my clipboard, and clipboards are magic, so people tend to leave you alone if you have a clipboard. And I'm doing all of this, and then I was reporting this out on a panel much like this, except my wife was in the front row, and she was like, you did what? So apparently she got a higher insurance policy on me. And then two, she reminded me that I am a husband and at the time father of 2 young children. Like maybe I'd have to figure out different ways to do my research. And I'm like, but I'm committed to authenticity and blah, 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 blah. So I ended up going to YouTube, right? Stay with me now. And I Google, I'm like, well, what would, I'm out at a scene, I'm like, ritual gang initiations, Indianapolis. What idiot would post their video clips to, oh my goodness.
We live in a world where nothing is sacred enough.
And they don't think twice about it. I'm like, literally people being jumped in on camera, and I'm just like, well, I mean, if you're gonna do that. So I mean, YouTube as a research tool, I think we also are just underestimating.
TikTok does the same.
And TikTok now, I'm seeing all sorts of videos on TikTok.
Linguistically, YouTube and TikTok are like absolute gold mines. Also, like language changes, it shifts, it moves. Learning those patterns is all kinds of interesting. And if you think plate tectonics moving is complicated, linguistics. That's my other love.
Well, there's also that aspect of writing what you know. A lot of the stories that are built around gang life, I'm taking from my own history. I mean, and I'm not saying that I was a gangbanger and I was running on the streets. I've got tons of family that did, living in Chicago. And it's one of those things where, that whole aspect of what I said at the very beginning of this particular segment, go out and find the experts. People are more willing to talk about something that they know than you really, give yourself or give it credit for. I know a friend of mine, his daughter wanted to make rocket shoes. He's like, okay, cool concept. How are we going to go about doing this? She goes off, starts her search on Google, gets all the specs that she thinks that she can get.
Keep in mind, this friend is doing this as a homeschool project, year-long project.
They actually got in contact with scientists from the JPL, Jet Propulsion Lab, and she actually had scientists giving her math so that she could get her boots to actually work. It's one of those things that it's like, we think that all this information is hidden from us, but it isn't. People want to talk about this stuff.
That part,
When
the number of
it comes to experts too, don't necessarily check for the academic credentials. I've never been a refugee, but I spent 3 years interpreting in a school for East African refugees. They are really experts on what it's like to have your world turned upside down.
Well, that's what I was going to add. It's like people love to be considered experts, and they are. Everybody's an expert at their thing.
Everybody's geek at something.
Right. Well, even the gang members, they were happy to have me and invite me to gang parties. All sorts of things. And I was like, sure, I'll go along. Because they're the experts, and I get to see their world, and they want to show me their world. Once they trust you, and you've done the work to build that relationship, mind you. And that's what I do. I make sure I'm building relationships with them. I'm not going in there as someone who's just there to extract from them. No, I'm building relationships with them. And then once I built the relationship, then like I said, it's just two at that point, it's two friends hanging out. Like, show me what you're into, and I'll show you what I'm into.
Yep. Well, no, and it's going back to that whole thing of gangsters, and the darker aspects of our, I would say, societies. As long as they don't want to be shown in a bad light. So as long as you tell them that, hey, I'm going to be writing this or I'm creating this, and and they'll be like, I will give you access to any level you want. Just don't make me look like I'm the chump. And it's one of those things. Scientists are some of the people, educators are some of those people that will gladly share their intelligence and their knowledge. The aspect that we think that we have to do all that research ourselves, cut the middleman, go straight to the source.
Well, do you have anything to say on this?
Yeah, I do. Get as many experts as you can to help you. I've participated in 2 expert pools, if you will. One for Eric Flint, which wound up with about 30 people that knew various things about the 17th century. And Eric drew from all of us information when he needed it about what to write. And Steve Sterling did the same thing for Dies the Fire and the Nantucket books. He got people who were experts in forging, in crafting. He even got a group of people who were Wiccans to advise him on proper ritual behavior. There's no limit to the number of people you can co-opt to help you, because there's a page for that in the book. It's called Thanks To.
Yeah, the author's acknowledgements pages, and
Very
sometimes
powerful.
it does become pages, are incredibly valuable to people.
Mhm.
Getting their name on there, woo.
Yeah, it makes you feel good, and it also means that you're going to go out and buy the book.
Yeah, make sure that page is really nice and long, good long list, because then those people are all going to buy it. At least one copy, and then another one for to show their parents that they actually did something worthwhile.
I'm wondering if anybody here has a problem with the world that they're building.
Oh, good question. Ask.
Okay, how many of you are building worlds right now? How many of you have problems with your world that you might like to work through?
Okay, there's a whole bunch of movement and I can't tell. Papers, please.
May we see?
Okay, we have an orange. Anyone else?
Well, let's start.
All right, we'll start with orange.
Go ahead.
Well, most of the world building I'm doing is mostly in my head at the moment. I haven't gotten any farther, but I have been doing it for a while. But okay, you got all the information from world building. How do you convey all of that if the main character, the point of view, is a child?
Okay, so the question is, how do you convey all of the work you did on world building through the point of view of your character, and his character apparently is a child?
Are you good? The structure of the story. All the information that you've created, you can throw through the eyes as he grows in the story. So have him pick out the things that you think that are interesting about the world, and make sure he goes to those areas, so that you have the opportunity to then use that information.
And the other answer is don't. Your character knows what they know about their world. You need to know an awful lot more. But, a kid knows that if they drop their ball, it can bounce.
Okay.
They don't need to know all of the physics into why that happens. And the same way that, a kid knows that we go to temple on Saturdays, or we go to church on Sundays, and we do these things. Do they know all of the history about that? No, they don't. They just know that it happens. You need to know why it happens and how it happens, so that you can describe it from their perspective. But you don't need to put all of that. Don't tell your readers, I did all of this research and now you're going to suffer for it. No, physics, astrophysics affects your world right now. Do you understand astrophysics?
No.
What is affecting your world? Biology affects your world. Do you understand all of it? No.
No, you understand what it does. You don't necessarily understand the mechanics of it.
You know that you get hungry and you eat.
A really good rule to follow is don't tell, show.
Absolutely.
If you're showing what it is, you're already sharing that information that you have in your head that is special to you, but you're showing it to your audience.
Speaking as an editor, one of the worst things you can possibly do in a story is what we call an as you know, Bob. As you know, Bob, the Earth is an orb and the sun is far away. No, your editor will cut all that stuff out, and if it's bad enough, your editor will draw the red line of death across your manuscript and send you back.
I love to take tropes and turn them on their ears, and one of my favorites is the, as you know, Bob. And I actually had a character go, as you know, this. Like, no, I didn't know that, was the response. And it was just like, what? Wait, whoa. And it totally made the story go in a wonky, where I wanted it to go, but it was a wonky direction, and got a lot of people commenting as from my writers group about, it's like, this is an as you know, oh, never mind.
So, I write a middle grade detective series. And so I have 2 books written in that series, and all the books are written in first person. And so one of the things about that is, it's not that I'm writing to middle schoolers, I'm writing from their perspective, which is 2 totally different things. One of the ways is, well, for a start, I'm getting back to that place inside me at that age, and I'm writing from that perspective. The other thing is, well, I work at a middle school. I'm surrounded by middle school students, so I'm very familiar with their voice, which is another key thing. And I hear how they describe the world around them. And so then it becomes a treat right? To see the world through their eyes and to write the world through their eyes, even if they don't even understand what's going on. Because you can have an unreliable narrator, and Lord knows middle schoolers, unreliable narrators. Adults. Well, I've now learned that if I just treat all of the world like everybody's a middle schooler, I just now get it. But yeah, you're writing from their perspective and their worldview. So I actually would get into disagreements with my editor over the series because she was just like, well, this seems too sophisticated for middle schoolers to pop up with. And I'm like, well, A, you don't have a middle schooler. And B, I actually aged this up because this was actually antics from my 4th graders. Because I hang out with kids, so I see how sophisticated and surprisingly sophisticated to some folks the children are. So the key thing with writing for through the child's POV is actually what I would focus on most is capturing that voice. Once you capture that voice and then see the world through their lens, it all kind of seems to work itself out.
The other fun thing, especially about kids nowadays, is how much access they actually have to information that might have been restricted in previous eras. YouTube. Hey, TV in general, but YouTube, TikTok. The parental controls on those are not what people think they are. And yeah, and when a kid gets really interested in something, they're gonna find their way to the information. Especially with Google now. Like, they don't even have to know how to spell it. Hey Google, what's a pterosaur? And they have just vast amounts of information. They don't put it together the same way that adults do. And that's what he's talking about with point of view and voice. Is, yeah, they have all that information. They don't necessarily put it together the way that an adult would.
2 things to remember. Somebody said it already, show, don't tell. The way that you communicate your information about all the research you've done is by showing it. Do a vignette in your story about how the world was formed or who makes cloth or, I don't know, anything you can think of, rather than saying, as you know, Bob, blah, 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 blah. Because what you did with the as you know, Bob, is about the only useful thing you can do with it, which is to turn it on its head.
Yeah.
The other thing,
And you can really only use that once.
yeah, unfortunately, once per book. The other thing that you need to do is you need to paint the walls of the room. You know where these people are. They know where they are, but the reader doesn't know where they are. And as far as the reader's concerned, there's 2 people or more standing in the middle of a white room. You need to paint the room.
The one caveat that I would say to that is in relation to your character. My wife had a story with one of her characters who was blind. And one of her beta readers was
complained bitterly that I never described the other character. I have no idea what the female character works. Well, that's because the male character is blind. He doesn't know what she looks like. Why should you?
But what do blind people do instead would be the editor's question.
Yeah, it's like, and talking to several blind people in relations to this story, they focus on sounds. What did she sound like? He talked a lot about the sound of her clothes, the sound of the way that her hair rustled against, things. He talked a lot about the scents. He knew what she was drinking because he could smell it. Like, well, if he can't see, how does he know that she's got a hot apple cider? It's like, you ever smell hot apple cider? And it's a lot of those things. Like, there's a lot of other senses. A lot of people assume that blind people like to touch other people's faces. No, they don't. They don't care what you look like, quite honestly. And I put that in the story. My character was recently blinded, and so he still sort of had some
connection to what do people look like, but he couldn't get it from his fingertips. And there's a really kind of fun, awkward moment where she's offering to let him touch her face. And it goes badly, and I won't spoil the story, but it ends up being funny, and I get a lot of pushback from that too, because it was supposed to be a romance story, and it will look like it was leading up to the sexy fun times, and it wasn't. Sexy fun times happened later.
Very romantic.
Because I didn't want it that way. Okay, we've got another orange back here.
All right, so you really are interested in plate tectonics and stuff, so this might be a good question for you. So I am writing a story about two feuding kingdoms. One of them is a more earth, plant-based kingdom, and the other is a water kingdom. And both of them are fighting over the Verdict Forest, which has all sorts of resources in the middle. And I'm just wondering, what kind of resources would they like to be fighting for?
What is the environment? Okay, with the plate tectonics, that just tells me where the mountains are. Mountains will tell me where the weather is. Deserts always happen on the leeward side of the mountain. So, and you get a lot of rain on the windward side. What direction is the world spinning? Where is the water coming from? So if you've got an island nation, you're probably talking about a subduction zone. So they're also going to have to deal with a lot of earthquakes, and they probably have volcanoes on those islands, because that's how the islands happened. What resources would they be fighting over in the middle? Well, if you're talking about like the land-based side, if they're on the desert side of things, they're going to be wanting the water resources from that forested land. The island probably wants just plain dirt to grow food in. Although they probably harvest most of their food from the sea. The other thing could be if they're both looking for like a precious metal, a mineral that is rare outside of the forest area. I'm not sure exactly what that would be. It would depend on what it is culturally that they want, because more than likely there's a particular kind of stone or metal that is very precious to them, that is very rare all throughout the world, but found in that area. Or they could just be going after the trees for the wood. Anybody else want to tell you? But that is the kind of thing. It's like, yeah, you need to know your cultures, which means that you need to know what they don't have in their regions.
And when you're building your world and you have your world map, that when you start, at least for me, when I start drawing it out and I can see where those areas that, okay, people won't live here, people will, congregate over here because, hey, there's a waterway here, there should be natural resources here, there. You look at how, on this world, how we congregate to certain locations based on what naturally is drawn by nature. That should, in many ways, guide how you deal with what they're looking for and how they're reacting to each other. And a lot of times it's like, how do they interact with their own resources? Are they the type that hoard them? Are they the type that, what kind of a social structure do they have within their community? It's a lot of questions that this would be something that would be good to have a sounding board with, have another person involved in having conversations back and forth.
All right. Gentlemen. We're actually running out of time. We have about a minute left for final thoughts. Walt, do you want to start us off with final thoughts?
Sure. If world building works, whether you're writing urban fantasy or romantic fantasy or an alien world or heroic fantasy or anything like that, you still have to know how the world works. You don't have to tell the readers how the world works. You show the readers how the world works. And if you have problems, go find help. There's lots of people out there who will help you.
Ken? Final thoughts?
Find people that you can trust with your ideas and world build as a team. Allow them to work on areas that you don't want to work. That saves you time.
Maurice?
Don't forget to dramatize your research, right? I mean, you can be as, you can go down endless rabbit holes and have done all this research, but it does you no good if it doesn't service the story. And I'm saying that because I'm literally coming up on a scene I'm about to write, and it's going to be around a meal. And a meal is a great way to dramatize an awful lot of research, because a meal is going to reveal things about people's culture. It's going to reveal stuff about their class, and it's going to reveal dynamics about the relationships of the individuals gathered at that meal. I get to cover whole areas of world building just over the course of dinner.
Oh yeah, that's a great plot device.
Yeah, world building is a start. You still have to tell the story. And the story takes place in the world, and yeah, it's really easy to borrow this one. This one has all sorts of rules and wonderful things. You need to know what they are. If you build your own world, you need to know the rules of that one too. But then tell the story. That's the important part. All right, and that pretty much ends us. We are a little bit over. Thank you very much.